I made a Genshin Impact Tabletop RPG, and this is how I did it. So for some context, I have some experience as a storyteller or a dungeon master, and I've created a bunch of different adventures with a lot of different systems, and my friends have always enjoyed playing them. I've played Genshin Impact for about a year and a half now, and it has a lot of cool stories that you can poach and steal for your own adventures. But I wanted to take it one step further and set an adventure in the world of Genshin Impact for my friends. So there's just one big problem. To date, and certainly to my own awareness, I am a stupid unicorn. I may have got this wrong. Genshin doesn't have a dedicated tabletop RPG system, and I think that's a shame, considering how popular the game is. There's been a few fan-made systems, which I'll talk about in a bit, but long story short, instead I decided to build off of what has quickly become one of my favourite RPG systems. The good news is Genshin is built as an RPG already. It has a lot of potential for various storylines and themes, and a whole host of likeable and definitely very marketable characters. Not to mention there's a deep lore running through the setting, if you know where to look for it. So I'm not going to have to reinvent the wheel for this project, so I was confident I had at least a starting point. The first problem I had, though, was to ultimately decide on what system I wanted to run. There's a lot of people out there who just like to stick with one or two systems, like 5th edition Junglers and Dragons, for example, but I am definitely not one of those people, and neither are my friends. So I think it's important when writing an adventure to keep your players as the focus. So for my group, I know a few things. We all like to roleplay, and we all enjoy variety. Though variety comes with an inherent cost when you're changing systems around a lot. Each time you pick up a new system, you need to relearn all the basics again. So we tend to try and stick to rules-light systems, which don't take too much effort to learn, or more general-purpose systems that you can bend and suit to your needs, as it were. If you can consider the amount of effort it requires to learn something in depth like that, you'll probably sort of understand my reasoning there. Though I can certainly understand if people like something crunchier and more prescriptive with rules. I also like those too sometimes. So if you do some research, you can probably find there's been several attempts to make a game system based on Genshin Impact, and there's probably quite a few that will probably remain undocumented as well. But ultimately, I felt that these were too in-depth for what I wanted to do. They were a very interesting case study, though. I'll leave a link in the description to the ones I found if you want to check those out. I'd say they're a lot more crunchier than what I've made here, so if you'd enjoy something like that, feel free to check that out. So what I did settle on using was a system called the Epithet RPG system. I'll drop a link in the description so you can download the rules. Basically, it's a rules-light system which encourages creativity from both the player and the storyteller to come up with how player characters play. It's a very flexible system, and I found it was an incredibly natural fit for Genshin Impact. Your only real limit with the system is your creativity, and it feels like the design philosophy was definitely flavour and fun over function and definition. There are some downsides to that, which I'll get to, and I did have to make a few tweaks to the core rules, which I'll summarise in this video. So firstly, I'll talk about how all this works, and I'll start with character creation. In Epithet, there are 3 statistics to worry about: stamina, proficiency, and movement. Movement is fairly straightforward. Epithet is played on a square grid, and your movement value tells you how far you can move across the board, how many squares. I play with my usual ruling about square grids, being each square is a 5-foot square for sake of arguing over arbitrary measurements, and your first diagonal counts as 1 move, and your second and every diagonal after counts as 2 moves. Stamina is essentially your health and your mana combined into one statistic. When you take damage, you lose stamina, and when you use your abilities, you also spend stamina as a resource. Proficiency is basically just experience points. You get them at the end of a fight, or when you roll a 20 on a 20-sided dice. To make character creation easy, Epithet gives you 3 different stat lines to choose from, which will decide your base movement and stamina. Then you roll a 20-sided dice and add this to your stamina from your stat line to decide your final stamina. Proficiency is similarly decided by rolling a 20-sided dice and taking that number as your final proficiency. If you feel rolling for stamina and proficiency is a bit too random and you're more of a fan of point buy, then I've got you covered. I found a good solution is to give players about 25 points to spend on either stamina or proficiency and let them decide for themselves how much they'd like of either. I also capped gaining abilities at 15 proficiency to incentivize spending points in proficiency just a little bit more. There's no official rules about what to do with proficiency. However, it's supposed to allow players to get new abilities or improve old ones for a job well done. So I tend to allow players to level up and gain a new ability every 5 proficiency or so. If you feel that's too often, just do it every 10 or whatever increment you feel suits your group best. Proficiency is a very loose experience system. I've given you a few suggestions on how to handle it, but ultimately it's up to you to decide what suits your players best. Some people really enjoy the feeling of progressing, and my suggestions are designed to try to cater to that. Then you have to come up with your abilities. In vanilla Epithet, this is done between a storyteller and a player, and your abilities are dictated by a keyword that you choose when making your character. So this brings me to my first major point of divergence in vanilla Epithet. In Genshin Impact, there's no real class structure at all. The closest to that is what weapon each character uses, like a sword or a greatsword, a polearm, a bow, or a catalyst. There's nothing really that ties these groups together beyond a basic set of attacks. A unit like Shenhe, for example, is used in a very different role than someone like Xiao, for example. The other common denominator is the element of each character, but even then you don't have a common theme. Sure, Xiangling and Hu Tao are both pyro polearm users, but the way you use them in combat, or the way they're intended for, is very different. I'm generalizing for the sake of argument, of course, because ultimately you can use any character in a wide variety of roles and builds. But if you look closely at any Genshin character and how they're structured, what artifacts come out at the time, how their signature weapon works, it starts to become really clear what they're intended to do on the battlefield. What I found is there's no real theme which ties them together, and that is great. That is actually really great, unironically really great. Ultimately, this plays really well into the Epithet system because Epithet is all about giving the player and the storyteller control over how they want their character to play. In order to finish character creation, I asked my players to assign their character one of the elements from Genshin Impact: Pyro, Electro, Hydro, Cryo, Dendro, Geo, and Animo. I use that as a starting point to decide what sort of elemental attacks that they will do. Then I ask them to come up with a class name to describe what their character is. This is just really used as a basis to decide what kind of abilities they should get and what they should be themed around, rather than a sort of game balance right now. It's important to give your players agency in this step so that they can ultimately play the anime character of their dreams, though it still needs to be grounded and restricted to the rules of Genshin Impact. So some examples of some class names from Genshin Impact itself: the Vigilant Yaksha, the Outrider, the Dandelion Knight. So long as it's cool and roughly describes your character, that's totally fine. Next, players get their powers, and I feel this is an important time to talk about how Genshin Impact works under the hood, because it's actually a really simple game, and it's very aligned with how Epithet wants to work as well. Each Genshin character has a set of basic attacks which are activated with a left mouse click. You can also hold down the left mouse button and release to perform a heavy attack. Next, they have an elemental power which can be activated by pressing E, then a big, powerful elemental burst, which can be activated by pressing Q once it's charged up. Finally, each character has a few special talents, which modify them on top of this established formula. They can be small, like a faster run speed during the day, like Dea, or could affect how you build a character entirely, such as the Raiden Shogun's talent, which increases her damage based on her energy recharge. This makes you want to equip her with artifacts which give her as much energy recharge as possible. This mimics Epithet almost to a T. In Epithet, the storyteller and the player together should write out 3 to 5 different abilities for a character. Make sure to keep in mind the element the player has chosen, as well as the theme that the player has picked. A character gets 3 abilities at the start of the game. The storyteller has ultimate say over what those abilities are, and are in control of that balance. But what abilities the character has should really be a result of negotiation between the player and the storyteller. I recommend choosing a couple of basic attacks with which to deal damage, either using physical or based on the character's element. Maybe a couple of elemental abilities which can augment the character or do some powerful damage for a bit more of an increased cost, maybe, or damage in a different way, as well as a powerful burst attack to act as a character's signature ability, which causes a lot of damage or does some cool summon or creates some sort of cool flashy field or something. If you're having trouble coming up with these abilities, then fret not. Do what I did. Just copy from the game. For example, one of my player characters has an ability I call Wave Shapes, which attacks 5 times. It deals 1 hydro damage each. Each time they use this, they generate an Abyssal token. And they have an ability which does a line attack, and the damage done is directly dependent on how many Abyssal tokens they have. I didn't make that ability, I just copied how Yanfei works, made it Hydro for the player, and then changed her square AoE thing she does into a line attack. You can also make some abilities able to be triggered quote-unquote anytime, which essentially allows you to trigger an ability when it's not your turn, based on some sort of trigger. I experimented with this and basically made Raiden Shogun's elemental skill for one of my players. So whenever another player hits a target, in a field that player generates, they can use an anytime ability to attack that target and do an additional damage. So there's a lot of possibility to do a lot of things that you can just sort of lift straight from the game if you really want. Finally, Epithet wants you to give each character a talent and a passive. These are just little things which round out the character and fill some sort of utility. Talents can be positive or negative, and they can increase or decrease stamina depending on whether they help you or hurt you. Come up with 3 talents with your player and then let them choose one. A good example of this is, we all know that the Raiden Shogun can't cook, so she gets a little extra stamina. Or Kokomi can walk on water when she uses her Raymond ability, and this takes away some of her stamina because it's helpful. There's also passives, which follow the same logic as talents, but don't modify stamina. They might be a bit more humorous in tone, or they might be useful only under certain specific conditions. For example, I gave Mona a passive where once per adventure, she can use her astral spyglass to predict the future and get a hint about the current plot. Once you have your abilities, you're basically ready to go, besides how to improve and level up your character. For this, I wrote a simple rule. For every time you get 5 proficiency, your character either improves one of their abilities, gains a new ability, or gains a new talent or a new passive. I feel that's a nice, steady way to progress. It works for me, but feel free to modify this as you see fit. The last thing to mention to do with my Genshin conversion is elements and elemental reactions. If you've played Genshin Impact, then you know the elemental reactions are a core part of the game. In my Epithet conversion, anyone hit by an elemental attack is tagged with that associated element. Then if they get hit with a different element, then some effect might occur. I've just put a table on screen now to show you what happens when different elements react with each other. I'll also include this table as a downloadable resource in the video description. If you wanted to come up with different elemental effects yourself, or exclude this altogether, that's also fine as well. So that's how I adapted the Epithet system to fit the world of Genshin Impact. With all that set up, now all I needed to do was make an adventure to play. If you've enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and giving this video a like. I'll be doing more episodes on this topic where I show off a full adventure that I put together for this system. And I'll be also including downloadable resources for you if you want to consider running it yourself. Also, if you had any feedback or questions, please feel free to leave a comment on this video. I'm keen to improve and help you out if I can, so don't feel shy. I sincerely hope you enjoyed. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful, pleasant day. Take care now.